Everyone knows who Rosa Parks is. She's been cemented as one of the most influential civil rights activists of our time. There are monuments, artwork, hell, there's even a song written about her, and rightfully so. And this is all because of something that she did that, without any context, sounds really simple. She stayed seated. And while the act itself sounds simple enough, the context surrounding her refusal to get up out of her seat is not simple at all. Her refusal to lift her derriere from a bus seat in 1955 Montgomery, Alabama was far from that. Her actions ignited a civil rights movement that would rock the foundation of Jim Crow laws and segregationist ideologies. But this change was a long time coming prior to Rosa Parks making her stand. Rosa Parks' actions that day were part of a planned grassroots initiative organized by the NAACP. And prior to Rosa Parks, there were several untrained civil rights activists who took a stand against segregation in public transit. Just regular, everyday people like you and I. But unfortunately, history is known for picking and choosing who gets to make the cut in the history books. And therefore, the lucky few who do happen to make the cut are chosen by those who hold all the cards, or at least some cards. So today I'll be talking about 3 lesser known heroes who came before Rosa Parks, who refused to give up their bus seats without any knowledge of having any support by any major organizations like the NAACP. Just regular people who were tired and fed up and just decided in that moment, enough's enough. Happy Black History Month, y'all. If it is in fact still February by the time this video makes it onto YouTube. Today, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I love bringing lesser known stories from history to the surface, calling them to the front of the classroom. So today, this is going to be one of those videos, specifically looking at their contributions to the Montgomery Bus Boycott. This type of change, it doesn't happen overnight. And there were people who came before Rosa Parks who laid the foundation to allow these events to transpire the way that they did. And by the way, there are way more hidden figures that contributed to the desegregation of buses that I'm not going to be talking about in this video. These are just the people that I wanted to focus on in this video. But I do implore you to take a look at the information that's out there and learn more about these hidden figures. As you're probably already aware of, in the United States, during Jim Crow, white passengers were given priority seating over Black passengers, and Black passengers were relegated to the back of the bus. And if the bus was full and a white passenger boarded, then Black passengers were forced to give up their seat to the white passenger, oftentimes by the bus driver or even a white passenger. Sitting across from a white passenger violated the social hierarchy that was imposed by Jim Crow. So not abiding by these laws would result in being arrested, assaulted, or even killed. But on December 1st in 1955, Rosa Parks, a Black seamstress and secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in defiance of the city's segregation laws. Prior to making her stand, Rosa Parks was an active member of the NAACP who had already engaged in civil rights activities, and this included training in civil disobedience as a form of protest. And upon Rosa Parks' arrest, the NAACP, they sprung into action right away, and the Montgomery Bus Boycott was born. Rosa Parks' protest was circulated in media outlets everywhere, and she became the face of the movement. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was elected the spokesperson for the movement by the boycott planners. And for 381 days, Black commuters boycotted the Montgomery bus system. That is a long time. That is over a year of going out of your way to make a statement, to make a change, and completely altering your day-to-day. That takes a lot of dedication. The civic engagement of this boycott was out of this world. I mean, people really came together as a community to make this happen. And I think it's very important for me to provide a lot of context to this because this was monumental. I mean, imagine people doing that today. I cannot. I'm not even gonna lie. Like our generation, my generation, maybe. And to accomplish this, Black commuters did what they had to do to get to where they needed to go, whether that was to get to school, to work, to buy groceries. Some people walked. Some created their own community transportation system. And as a result of the boycott, as well as the united effort of the Black community and some white allies, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional in 1956. After over 300 days of boycotting, progress was made. All right, so if you do a quick YouTube search of something like bus boycott, you will find that the search results will give you a plethora of videos that hyper focus on Rosa Parks. She is literally in the thumbnail, which makes sense, you know? She became the face of the movement. But there were many other Black women prior to Rosa Parks who contested the bus segregation ordinance, and not just in Montgomery, Alabama, but in other parts of the United States as well. And, you know, for whatever reasons, they decided to say, screw this, I'm not getting up. Whether they were just tired or whether enough was enough that day, or they decided to become a part of something that was greater than themselves. And again, this isn't to take away from what Rosa Parks did. Her contributions to end segregation were monumental, and just the act of refusing to give up that seat, whether she had the support of the NAACP or not, whether she was, you know, trained in civil disobedience or not, that took a lot of courage. That was dangerous, okay? Like, I really want to paint a picture. It was dangerous to say no for any Black person. But even so, not to discredit Rosa Parks for her contributions, there are other people who also had the courage to take a stand that didn't receive their flowers. And that's because there were civil rights leaders at that time that believed that their lives didn't meet the perfect set of circumstances that they thought they should have for their stories to be told in mainstream media. One such courageous person was a woman named Irene Morgan Kirkaldy, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing her name. And her refusal to give up her seat took place 11 years before Rosa Parks and the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Now, this case does not take place in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's also more focused towards interstate bus transit, but I still wanted to include this case and this person's story because this took place years before Rosa Parks. And this was one of many independent acts of civil disobedience that ultimately created that foundation that would lead to the desegregation of buses. Irene Morgan Kirkaldy was born on April 9th in 1917 in Baltimore, Maryland, my hometown. That might be the other reason why I included her in this story, I'm not gonna lie. On July 16th in 1944, Kirkaldy was heading back to Baltimore from Gloucester, Virginia on a Greyhound bus after suffering from a miscarriage. All right, so I had to actually stop for a little bit and come back a little bit later in case anything looks kind of different or off. So if it does, that's why. She sat in the back of the bus, which was obviously the designated area for Black passengers. And then about a half hour into the bus trip, the bus became a bit packed. And then a white couple boarded. So then the bus driver demanded to Kirkaldy that she give up her seat to the white couple as per Jim Crow law. This is the authority that Jim Crow essentially gave the bus driver. But Miss Kirkaldy, she was not playing that day, okay? Not only did she refuse to give up her seat, she also refused to allow the passenger that was sitting next to her to give up their seat as well. The bus driver then decided to drive all the way to the nearest jailhouse to get her arrested. 2 officers showed her a warrant for her arrest, and guess what she did in response? This is the most gangster shit. She tore it up in their faces. I cannot say with any certainty that I would have the courage, the cojones, to do that myself. They then forcibly removed her off the bus, but not without a fight. She was definitely with the shits that day. She was tired. Honestly, after what she had just gone through, something as devastating as a miscarriage. And then to be told to get up out of your seat for these strangers just because of the color of your skin and the color of their skin. She was not playing with them that day. So they sent her to jail, and her mother would pay her $500 bail, which estimated with inflation today was about $8,800. So a good amount of money. She was then charged with resisting arrest, and which she pled guilty to. I mean, she did resist arrest. The second charge was violating Virginia's Jim Crow segregation law. And it was this charge that she would not accept. This woman was so courageous. Let me tell you, okay? When she publicly denounced this charge and this law at her trial as a whole, this was in front of a packed courthouse. And on top of that, the Ku Klux Klan was posted right outside the courthouse. Kirkaldy and her lawyer made an appeal to the Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, and they argued that transportation segregation impeded interstate commerce. That was the crux of their contesting the Jim Crow law. Unfortunately, the court stuck with its verdict. And it was at this point that the NAACP's interest was piqued. In her case, they were interested. And that's because they were looking for a tester case to oppose transportation segregation at the Supreme Court level. So the NAACP's lawyers and none other than Thurgood Marshall took Kirkaldy's case to the Supreme Court. And they used the same argument, which was that segregation in transportation impeded interstate commerce. And also, like, just to, provide context, in case you're not familiar with, like, what interstate travel is. So with, like, the Montgomery bus boycotts and Rosa Parks, whatnot, that was, like, within a state. So within the state of Alabama. Kirkaldy was traveling between Maryland and Virginia, and so that would be considered interstate travel. So this was a case that specifically was looking at traveling across state lines. And as a result, the case Morgan v. Virginia was born. And on June 3rd in 1946, almost 2 years after Kirkaldy refused to give up her seat, the Supreme Court ruled 6-1 in her favor. Who was that one asshole? So as a result, segregation in interstate travel was declared unconstitutional and therefore outlawed. This was most certainly a landmark case. However, it did not have the immediate effect that one would hope it would. Because many southern states, including Virginia, their response to it was pretty much bump that. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing, which is segregating interstate travel. This includes the buses, terminals, all of it. We don't care what the Supreme Court's ruling was. And so they continue to forcibly remove African Americans off of these buses and whatever other like interstate travel vehicles. Even though that was the case, it did, however, put into motion future events that would lead to change. Change doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. And while this was a Supreme Court ruling, and this isn't the only time that this has happened in history where the Supreme Court was like, hey, this is unconstitutional, stop that, and an individual state was like, fuck you, so that is unsurprising. However, the actions of Miss Kirkaldy that day really helped to lay the foundation of change in segregation as a whole, not just in transportation and buses, but as a whole. And she was such a brave woman. This was someone who had zero intention of becoming an activist or starting anything at all, really. She didn't leave the house that day in Baltimore and went to Virginia and was like, today's the day I'm going to make a stand. And then on top of that, this woman had just suffered one of the most traumatic experiences ever, which was a miscarriage. And then she was traveling across state lines. Like, can you imagine? By herself. And you want to tell me to get out of my seat? Bitch, please. No. Once again, I don't know if I would have had the balls or cojones to do what she did, but Claudette Colvin. Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old girl who was arrested 9 months before Rosa Parks. So we're fast forwarding a little bit. We were in 1944 with Kirkaldy. Now we're going into 1955. Early in the year, both Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin were arrested for refusing to give up their seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. However, the big difference between these two people is that history only really recognizes one of them for their contributions to progress, even though both of them were civil rights activists in their own right. In March 2nd of 1955, Colvin boarded a bus with her classmates after getting out of school. And after just a few stops, the bus became crowded and a white woman was left standing in the aisle. And the bus driver didn't even tell one black person to get out of their seat. He told four black students to give up their seat for this one person, this one white woman on opposite aisles. Colvin was one of the 4 students that was told to move. And of the 4, 3 of them got up. Colvin did not. She was then dragged off the bus by 2 white officers and then handcuffed. And I want to reiterate, she was 15 at the time. This is a child. She was arrested and became one of 4 plaintiffs involved in a federal court case known as Browder versus Gale, and it contested the constitutionality of bus segregation laws. And actually, we'll have another hidden figure that I'll be talking about in this video that was also involved in Browder versus Gale. So Colvin, she faced charges related to assaulting a police officer, which she denied. She was very vocal about the fact that she went without any resistance. Unlike Kirkaldy, she was like, nah. But this young lady went peacefully and without resistance. She was also charged with disorderly conduct and, of course, defying the city's segregation laws. The district court judges declared that the state and local bus laws on segregation were unconstitutional, but the state decided to take it to the Supreme Court on appeal because they were not satisfied with the ruling. And in response, the Supreme Court essentially told the state of Alabama to kick rocks, and they declared segregation on public transportation as unconstitutional. After Colvin's arrest, she initially received a lot of support from Black civil rights activists, including activists within the NAACP, like Rosa Parks. Colvin's case was initially intended to be used to test the constitutionality of Montgomery's segregation laws, but all that changed just a few months after her arrest. And that's because Colvin was 15 and pregnant. And so many of these activists began questioning whether having a pregnant, unwed teenage mother becoming the face of this movement to segregate public transportation was a good idea. In the end, 2 of the charges against Colvin were dropped, and Colvin was still found guilty of assaulting police officers, even though she went peacefully. Fast forward, and Rosa Parks becomes the face of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Her story is also important. However, Colvin was one of many whose stories were completely sidelined because of respectability politics. And I can't begin to imagine the bravery it took for this 15-year-old girl to just take a stand like that. When I was 15, I wasn't thinking about this kind of shit. I wasn't thinking about protesting, acts of civil disobedience. I read in an interview where she was asked why she did what she did, why she took a stand. And her response is pretty interesting, and I want to share it with you guys. She told them that she was just tired. In school, she was being taught about great Black figures who fought against oppression, and she was just so inspired. So she wanted to do something too. That right there just confirms why it is so important to share these type of stories, especially when we are educating children. Mary Louise Smith Ware. So Mary Louise Smith Ware was another Black civil rights activist that was arrested prior to Rosa Parks for refusing to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama. The date was October 21st in 1955. Smith was an 18-year-old housekeeper who was returning home on a Montgomery City bus after having traveled all the way across town to pick up money a client owed her, only to discover that the family wasn't even home when she got there. And as somebody who caught public transit for 10 plus years, this is frustrating. Okay, so we already know what time she was on when she left that house. And within typical fashion of these type of stories, at some point after she had boarded the bus, a white woman boarded, and a male passenger wanted Smith to give up her seat to this woman. And in response, she refused. And I would like to share with you a direct quote from Miss Smith. When she was interviewed by Time magazine. She said, "A lady got on the bus and a man got up for her and wanted me to get up and give up my seat." And that's what really popped off, because I was not going to stand for almost a mile or more to get to my next destination. I was upset. I might have said a bad word at that time because I was angry. I just didn't feel like it was right. Honestly, this woman sounds so sweet. Just saying I might have said a bad word at that time, I feel like that really gives you insight into the type of person she was. Smith was arrested and fined $12, and with inflation, this equated to around $138. She was, of course, charged with failure to obey the segregation ordinance. Smith would be signed on as one of the 5 original plaintiffs, along with Colvin, in the Browder v. Gale case. Now, as far as not receiving her flowers, though, Smith was another young activist like Colvin, she was 18 at the time, whose case did not receive the light of day due to respectability politics. Local civil rights leaders like E.D. Nixon, who was the head of the Montgomery NAACP chapter, felt that Smith also did not fit the right profile to withstand the public scrutiny she would receive. And this is because her father was allegedly an alcoholic, and she wasn't considered to be from the right class in order to be the face of the movement. I want to say this much, because I don't want to make it sound like civil rights leaders like E.D. Nixon were these horrible people. Part of me gets it, and then another part of me is kind of frustrated because, I understand not wanting people like Colvin and Smith to become the face of the movement in a sense of protecting them, because these are young people, these are children, and Colvin was about to become a 15, 16-year-old new mom. That is a lot for a child to deal with. And then being in the spotlight, being scrutinized. And I don't even have the time in this video to completely unpack how much groups like the KKK and just individuals would just make these young women's lives hell. The harassment, the threatening, violence even could ensue. So I get that, not wanting them to become the face of this, movement, the bus boycott. However, it still kind of feels like their histories were almost completely squashed. They didn't have to be the face of the movement, but at the same time, I wasn't taught these women's names in school. I went to an all-black school in Baltimore City, and we would always learn about the same people: Rosa Parks, Mary McLeod Bethune, Thurgood Marshall, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Madam C.J. Walker, the list goes on and on. Langston Hughes. So, very little on Langston Hughes, honestly. So when the people who have all or at least some of the cards are able to design these stories and what gets out to the media and what doesn't, it has a ripple effect throughout history, and it affects not only the education of future generations, but also the people who actually took a stand. These women deserve their flowers, all 3 of the women that I mentioned in this video. And these are not the only people. There are so many more hidden figures who contributed to the desegregation of buses. And not just buses, desegregation as a whole, because this type of stuff doesn't happen overnight. Rosa Parks sitting and then not getting up was not enough to make everything change, okay? There were so many people who came before that laid that foundation, that groundwork that allowed change to happen. I just feel like it's unfortunate that the history I was taught as a child spreads this narrative that massive change happens overnight. you know, it doesn't. That's the end of my rant. I feel like my thoughts are really like discombobulating all over the place, and I was really trying to find my voice in relaying what I was feeling and my thoughts on the topic. So I apologize if it was all over the place, but I just wanted to say that, you know, there are many people over time who chip away at systems of oppression, and way too often these people are overlooked. So anyway, thanks for watching this video. That's all I got. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and subscribe if you like what you hear and or see. Until next time. So awkward with it.